mean, it's like doing a birth plan. I
Yes,
still talk about all the things, but I always make a point to say, a birth plan is for you to know about choices, about things that might come up, about things that will come up, so that whatever ends up happening or being needed, I'm aware of your preferences so that I
yeah,
can respect those
yes,
as much as possible and help negotiate through things that might not be what you were hoping for, but that you'll feel like whatever happens was being done for you and not to you,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
you
and
and your baby.
I see this a lot in my work, right? Um where I'm helping people to plan for a positive and empowering birth experience after a previous traumatic one. And part of what we talk about is creating birth plans and focusing on the things that for like what were the hurdles from your first birth experience, what are the things you're scared of happening again, what are the things you're ruminating over in your pregnancy, going, what if that happens again? Those what ifs are the things that you need to talk about. Like if they do come up again, if you do go post dates again, if you do have another big baby, how do you want to deal with it this time? How do and so talk about those things. So have some contingency plans and also plan for your ideal birth, right? Like, and so that your mind is more at ease, that you know that the things that have been playing on your mind are there's no more what ifs because you've talked about it with your support team, with your midwife. They know what's important to you if those things that happen again. And so you can sort of let those what ifs drop away and let the ideal birth um, come to the fore of your mind a bit more easily. And a lot of people don't have their ideal birth experience. There are plenty of people who, no matter the awesome planning they've done and the work they've done to heal their trauma and the relationship they have with their awesome midwife and all that sort of thing, sometimes birth throws us curveballs. And what I find with women who end up, say, with a cesarean that they were wanting to avoid, or end up needing to transfer from home or whatever, that if they've done the work in the pregnancy and they have the relationship with their maternity care providers and their support team, where their needs and wants, their preferences, their fears, their hopes have all been discussed, and they come out the other side of those births feeling really healed and empowered and and positive about it. So it's not about what happens to us in birth nearly so much as it is about whether we feel seen and heard, respected, cared for, and those sorts of things, right?
100%. I get it, and I agree with you. Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's about doing my own personal work too, so that my ego's not in the way of doing, and my own like professional concerns about how this is gonna be seen. How am I going to be impacted by this by colleagues who think that I'm being unsafe and blah, 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 that I have to deal with that a lot to be able to really listen and see someone else.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
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 this,
that in and of itself is so important. I had that experience recently in Tonga because I got registered as a midwife, but apparently the process that it went through, it didn't get ticked off by the big boss, and she got upset. Anyway, I was essentially told that, yes, you got this registration, but you aren't um you aren't to do anything midwifery. If these, there was a woman that I was gonna go with for the birth, that I was told if she asked me to attend her birth with her as a support person, that she had the right to do that, but that I would be there as her support person and the staff would be taking care of her. And I better not be saying anything or doing anything that's going to make her doubt the quality of care that she's going to get, because that wouldn't be good, would it? I mean, it was so I really, when I went to the birth with her, she, first of all, she had to choose me over her husband. They would only let one person. So I was there, and there were times when I was supporting her and they were doing things that I did not agree with, and but I was there and I was letting her know that I see you and I'm here, and I just that I see you and I see what's happening and I see you and I'm staying here with you. They were so grateful. So grateful. And yeah, there was another woman that came in when I was at the hospital one day who at 32.5 weeks, they couldn't find a fetal heart. And it was her first baby, and the baby had demised. So she had to be induced in a couple of days. And I wasn't there for the induction, but I went the evening after she'd birthed her baby. And I spent time with her. I just, over the next couple of weeks while I was there, I met up with her several times and, just, I guess, made a connection, or formed and she calls me, I think she pronounced it Nina, or I'm like grandmother. And she has said I saved her life, and all I did was let her know that I see you and I'm aware of the difficulty and the trauma of what you've been through. It's same in Cambodia that I would go out into villages to meet people with disabilities with our disabled Cambodian staff. And they wanted us to see what could we do with this person or that person. And they would tell me their stories and I would just cry. And in Cambodia, they're not allowed to cry. Like it's not a culturally okay thing. So they're telling you these horrific stories and they're smiling. But I was told, Sharon, look in their eyes. You can see it in their eyes. It's different than a real smile. But one of the women I worked with said, Sharon, they love you so much because I'm like letting out the feelings and crying. And for the stories they're telling me that they haven't ever been allowed to cry about.
So they're feeling so seen and heard in their experience.
Validated.
Validated. Yeah. Yeah.
Validated. So yeah, I mean that is that. So I've had women come to me. I remember one specifically, I was doing a locum for 2 months during level 4 lockdown, and she contacted me at like 35 and a half, almost 36 weeks, and said, this is my fourth baby. I have had no care because I didn't think I'd find anybody who would support me because I'm sure I need an elective cesarean. And she'd had 3 vaginal births, but they were all very traumatic in different ways, different. She told me all. So I met with her and I said, I'm going to support you with whatever it is that you want or need. And so she told me the stories and I said, okay, well, we don't have a lot of time and they're going to try to talk you into a vaginal birth, but I'm going to support you. And we got in to see an obstetrician pretty quickly. And I wish to this day, I wish I had recorded that obstetrician giving all the arguments against cesarean and why you know, they're increase the risk for the next baby and they're this and they're that. I just so wish I had recorded it so that
Mm.
I could play it back to obstetricians, you know. But anyway,
Yeah.
they had her see a psychologist to, you know, and the psychologist was saying if I had more time, I think I could work with her and, you know, have her be open to at least an induction in the hospital that was controlled or something because of the things that had happened. But I don't have time, and she's adamant and she's thought this through, and, you know, to the point that she's avoided care.
Mm.
Anyway, they finally agreed to do the cesarean. And then the ironic thing was, at 39 or 39 and a half weeks or whatever, before they were going to do the cesarean, I realized the baby was breech, and I sent her in and they're like, yeah, they confirmed it was breech. And then they were happy to do the cesarean, even though they had said, no, 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 no. I mean, not even that, you know, there's perspectives.
Mm.
So
I find,
she's very, very, very grateful.
mm, yeah. And did she have a positive birth experience? How did she feel after that?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Like she, you know, she and her family own or run a resort place, you know, camping, whatever, with cabins, and you're like, you're welcome to stay here anytime, you know. Yeah, so grateful.
Yeah.
And when we were talking at the very beginning, I was thinking about a couple of women, like how things don't necessarily go the way you want,
Mm.
but you don't know what's going to happen, so you don't necessarily know what you're going to want,
Yeah, that's
depending
true.
on what
Yeah.
ends up
Unfolds.
happening, what
Mm.
unfolds.
Mm.
And there's this woman that I met. She contacted me for care, and she had had 2 elective cesareans in South Africa. And she told me about those experiences. And she was from a small town in South Africa, and the only obstetrician was a friend of her parents, a personal friend. He was the only one in town, and he talked everyone into a cesarean. And he apparently showed her and her husband the actual copy of his indemnity insurance and what he had to pay each year. And he said, it's that expensive because birth is dangerous. And if anyone really loves their child, they would go through whatever means possible to pay for an elective cesarean. And he said to them, um, if you agree to do this with me, we'll say and document that you were induced and then you needed an emergency cesarean, so your insurance will cover it. So he got them into this fraud,
Yeah.
to agree to fraud. And so both of their 2 children, at least the first one, that had to be done, and then maybe he could do. So it says that she was induced, which she says she was not, and that it was an emergency cesarean with a induction that caused fetal distress. It was not. So she had 2 elective cesareans, and those were the circumstances.
Wow. So
So
interesting. And coming back to what you were saying earlier about you wish you could have recorded that obstetrician and played it back to other obstetricians, isn't it ironic how when women are asking for a cesarean, after they've had an elective cesarean, after they've had a traumatic vaginal birth experience, they are met with, no, it's safer to have, have a vaginal birth and have a cesarean, and like this doctor did, listed off all the reasons why. Whereas when it suits the doctor's preference or under other circumstances, they're telling you all the reasons why you should be having a cesarean, and that, yeah, it's just,
So
so
I want to just finish up what happened with that woman. She wanted a vaginal birth. She had never even gone into labor, like,
which woman?
the one from South Africa,
Right,
the one who'd had the 2 electives
right.
under duress, like
Yeah,
extreme. That was abuse.
yeah.
That was abuse.
Mhm.
Totally. Anyway, so um, I tend to go with women to appointments with the obstetricians where I know not everyone midwives do that, but I have found it helpful, and I history about that. So anyway, at this one particular appointment, she was to go, and they started early, and I'd had trouble finding parking, whatever. And I got there, actually, I was on time, not late, but they'd already started. So I had to go knock on the door because the receptionist told me where the woman was. And so I go in and they'd already started. So I just said, "Oh, I'm her midwife and I've come for the appointment. Sorry, that I wasn't here for the beginning. I just, whatever." And I sat down and I was being quiet, right? Listening. And the obstetrician was saying, "Well, you will have to have an IV line in. You will not be allowed to labor in water. You will have to be continuously monitored." All these that way of talking. And I'm listening, and I said, "Well, I'm just listening to you, and I'm wondering if we can pause for just a second here." And they paused. The obstetrician was just spouting this stuff off and writing. And I said, or, typing. And I said, "I've just been listening to you." And I repeated back to her what she just said. I said, "You've just told her that she, will not allowed to be labor in water. She will not be allowed to have a water birth. She will have to have an IV line. She will have to have continuous fetal monitoring." And I said, "And I'm thinking about what you've just said, and I'm thinking about it in terms of um, women's choice. And I think what you mean to say is these are the things that you recommend, and that you would like to give her your rationale for those recommendations."
You are a legend, Sharon. I'm loving this.
Oh my God, you could just see this woman like, "How dare you, you
Wow.
little midwife, you." And she was just, you can see it like squirming. And she said, "Oh, well, of course. Well, of course." And, she starts typing more, and she's going on, but she's like tripping over her words. And when I got the letter, how you get a
Yeah.
letter it had all of the protocols with the number A.79421D that says this, and for everything that she was recommending, right? And I've
Yeah.
never gotten a letter that actually quotes all of the protocol.
Guideline. Yeah.
So then what actually ended up happening, the woman, I think she was sitting on the fence. I can't remember, but she had decided she wanted a home birth. We go walking out to our cars. I have to tell you this bit. We're walking out to our cars, and she says to me, "Sharon, I am so glad you showed up for my appointment, because everything changed once you got there."
Yeah.
And I said, "Everything changed? What do you mean? What changed?" And she said, "Well, before you got there, she told me I wasn't normal." And I said, "What? She told you you weren't normal?" And she said, "Yeah. She told me that a normal woman who's had 2 cesareans would be wanting another cesarean."
Out.
I know. I know. I was like, what? I'm glad I came to. How dare she say? I mean, here's an abused woman trying to avoid being abused again.
Yeah. Yeah. Trying to take some control back, trying to direct the path of her experience. And once again, she's being met with, "I know better than you. you're not safe to go down the path that you're, claiming you want to take. And you need to do what I say to keep yourself safe. Like, yeah, yeah.
So, okay, now back to the story.
Yes.
So she lived in South Auckland and I was up in Helensville. So it was like, depending on traffic too, and through Auckland, it could be easily an hour and a half drive from my house to her house. And if the traffic was bad, longer.
Right.
So um, she was booked in at a hospital that was a little bit closer to her. Okay, then and I was maybe an hour to the hospital. She was 30, 40 minutes from the hospital from the other direction. So she was having early labor, the New Zealand niggles. I've never heard that until I came here, but she's niggling, and being who she was, I wanted to be a little more, I don't know if the word is cautious, but attentive. And so I went down because it was evening and the traffic wasn't bad, and I went down and she was not in what we would think of as established labor yet, and her other children were asleep and her husband was attending to her really well, and I just said, okay, well, I'm going to sleep on the couch and just come get me if things ramp up a bit and you feel like you need me. Well, I slept the whole night on the couch. And in the morning, things had settled down for her. And I said, okay, well, that's good. You probably need some sleep after she got the other kids off to school. And so I said, I'm going to go about my day and, just call me when things start up again. Yeah. So it wasn't until the next morning, pretty early, that she called and she said, Sharon, I've been having contractions for like the last hour and a half and they're getting really strong, and I'm having this like ripping burning pain down where my old incisions are, and it doesn't go away between the contractions. It's like really you know painful, and I'm not getting a break from it at all. And I said, well, it sounds to me like maybe I need to meet you at the hospital. Is that what you're thinking? And she said, yes, yes, I think that's what I need to do. I need to go to the hospital. And I said, okay, well, you're closer to the hospital. Why don't you and your husband head in? I'll call them and let them know that you're on your way, and I'll head down and I'll see you, but you'll be there by the time I get there, but I'm on my way to meet you there. So when I got to the hospital, the the staff said, we know she doesn't want another cesarean, and so we've given her some morphine, but we're really concerned. We haven't talked to her about this, but we think she probably needs another cesarean. And I said, what? She's having this ripping, burning pain, and that's so bad that you've given her how much morphine, and you haven't even talked about the possibility of her needing another cesarean. That's why she's here.
Yeah.
She is concerned, and it's not that she doesn't want a cesarean. She wants one if she needs it. She just doesn't want unnecessary stuff. We need to go talk to her now. I can't believe you haven't already talked to her. Anyway, like, I did it calmly.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I can be calm. So we went in, and of course she had another cesarean, and it had not ruptured, fortunately it was a healthy baby, healthy. And then postnatally, when I'm finishing up her care, she said, Sharon, or it might have even been months later, because tend to stay in touch with people. She said, Sharon, my birth with you changed everything. It changed everything. And she said, after my first two daughters, I was ready to go back to work. I was actually happy to go back to work, shortly after they were born. And, I just did the things as a mom. But this time, I love staying home with my girls. She had three daughters by then. I feel like I'm a totally different mother than I was before. And I know that I needed that cesarean. I still think it was probably because of the abuse from the first two that she needed it, but that was her story. She needed it. And she just said, I'm a much more motherly mother, and I'm so in tune with my girls, and I'm bonded with all three of them. Like I didn't even, that was more than I'd hoped for her. And
Yeah.
so it's so important, it's just so important. And then another woman that wanted a home birth after 2 cesareans with me, she got to at home to fully, and I think she was starting to push. And she'd said, in transition, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do it. And I said, I know, but that's really common. Almost everybody gets to the point where they feel like they really can't, but they do, and this is normal. And that's what I assured her at first. But then she just got like, I've got it. It's not okay. I need to go to the hospital. I really need to go. This is not okay. And it was like dragging on like that. And I said, okay, let's call an ambulance and I'll take you. And in the ambulance, she was just like, pushing, and she really was not progressing. And we got to the hospital, and the obstetrician was wonderful. I'd seen him with her in her pregnancy, and he didn't go straight. He didn't recommend a cesarean right away. I think she might have had an epidural. And for like 2 or 3 more hours, there were efforts, attempts, support for her to try to have this vaginal birth. And I was wondering, is this, and she ended up with another cesarean, and she too was so grateful. She said, Sharon, I cannot thank you enough for your care. And she said, it's the first time that I've known I needed a cesarean, that she was convinced she needed it. And she felt, I mean, there is grief, that there's grief to get through, but I think we get through that. It's the trauma and not feeling seen or heard or validated, or wondering, why did they do this to me? I mean, I'm telling you this stories that weren't, quote, successful, but I'm showing that even when they don't look successful, there's success.
No, this is so true. And in fact, I would say that for people who have had the sort of support that you're describing, like, good midwifery care, a really supportive partner, they've done the work to, work through past traumas, or the sort of thing that, again, I mean, I said it earlier, but it's not about how they end up giving birth. It's about feeling seen, heard, respected, loved, cared for, through that experience, that makes all the difference. And so for people who I've worked with who have had what I call shitty bad luck trauma experiences, which are where they've had amazing care, they've trusted that they know what's best for their baby, and they've had all the right sort of support and information, and the lead up to their birth, but they've ended up with something like a stillbirth or a premature birth, or their baby has needed to go to intensive care for some unforeseen reason. That, in my experience, that can often not, like, there'll be grief, but not trauma, like I'm hearing about from women who felt done to, felt unheard, felt unseen in their experience, felt that their choices weren't respected, felt that they weren't given enough information, that, yeah, these sorts of things, this disempowerment that comes from those sorts of experiences is often what leads to the experience being this ongoing trauma of, like, it's
That's taking
terrifying.
away from their life,
Yes.
instead of them living their life fully capacitated, they're incapacitated.
Yeah, that's right. So when somebody experiences, say, a loss experience, a stillbirth, um, that's inevitably going to entail a crap ton of grief. And for some, it will be a very traumatic experience. But I have also heard stories from women where it's not, they wouldn't describe it as traumatic, that it was, incredibly sad, but they felt it wasn't something that impacted their nervous system in a crazy way for ongoing. They weren't consciously anxious, they weren't experiencing PTSD type symptoms and this sort of thing, because they had felt so beautifully supported through that process.
And grief is normal. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
normal part of life. We're all going to experience grief at some time or another. So to expect to avoid grief is not, that's
Yeah.
a reasonable expectation. But to help women feel supported and loved and cared for, then that's going to lead to them not being, this trauma thing is real. It is and it comes, I think, from the care providers or people in general being detached from their own emotion. They've they've had to maybe deal with so much stuff, and they're under so much stress in their job, and they're pressured to conform to they're a wheel or a cog on the wheel in the machine, and if they don't carry out their job in a certain way, then it comes back on them, and some people, they can't afford to give up their job or lose their job. They've got student loans to pay and a family so I've been privileged enough, I guess, in my life to make changes about where I am. Like, where am I left the United States, onto your first question for me to think about for this podcast. I For me, midwifery it felt like a spiritual calling. It was not a professional move to go up the ladder professionally. It wasn't even just picking a job. I was a physical therapist for 12 years. When I had my own children, I was a physical therapist, and I had grown up for 3 years in Tonga, where my programming, I guess, was that birth is a normal physiological event. I remember being at my friend's playing with kids next door in Tonga, and one of the aunties was pregnant. And then I went over the next morning to play, and there was a baby in the bed with her that had been born there in the night. And so that was normal. And my mom had told me that she had had all three of us after doing a Lamaze course, and she breathed and did what, had us naturally. And I guess that was back when they were still putting women to sleep. Like I guess they pulled the babies out. They delivered the babies, right? Yeah. And she had at natural births. They were in hospital with an obstetrician, but apparently even the obstetrician, she said, told one of the nurses after, looked over at a labor and delivery nurse and said, that's what birth is supposed to be like. So it was, and she was proud of herself and said that the days that me and my two brothers, the three of us were born, were the three best days of her life. So I had this, programming that birth is, and I went to see an obstetrician when I was pregnant with my first baby, and he was who all my friends were going to. I was working at a hospital as a physical therapist, and I went to see him, and my husband Dave went with me, and so I was in my late 20s. Dave was in his 40s, almost 50 actually. So we were professional, you know, like I wasn't a little kid. And we waited a long time in this huge waiting room with like lots of other people waiting. There was a big group of obstetricians, but he was like the best, supposedly, or you know. And the receptionist said, "Oh, he's having his doing his second or third cesarean for the day. He's running a bit late, but he will see you if you wait. You just have to wait. He will see you." So I got in there with Dave, and this older white-haired man said, I just remember he said, don't worry. He put his arm around me and he said, don't worry. I take care of all my girls. I don't let them suffer. And he did a scan and could see a yolk sac. It was like 4 weeks. You couldn't even see the little grain of rice baby yet. And he said, yeah, you're about 4 weeks. Come back and I'll see you again in a month, whatever. And, you know, and I walked out of there thinking, I don't even know how to have a conversation with that person.
Yeah.
You know, I don't even know where to start. I don't think he'll hear me. I have to find somebody else. You know, like this is not going to work. I knew it in my bones, right? And my own personal history that I wasn't even aware of at that time in my life, but it wasn't until my children were little and I was thinking that if anybody did to my children what my father did to me, I think I would want to kill them. And so I think there's more wrong with what happened than I have let myself be aware of. And I had Dave called it years later a nervous breakdown. This was when my children were little, but I was just crying and crying and crying and crying hysterically because it was my father's birthday and I hadn't acknowledged his birthday. Like he was a doctor, Dr. God. He was one of those doctors. He had trained as a surgeon. He had an ego that was impermeable. And he ran the house as Dr. God, and he was my idol. And I went into counseling. No, it was, thank goodness, a counselor friend started to talk with me because Dave didn't know what to do with me, and I was in the car in her driveway. I couldn't, I was a blubbering idiot. And I didn't know what was wrong. And she started talking with me and saying, you know, asking me, and I just said, it's my father's birthday and I haven't sent him a card. I haven't called him and I cannot do it. I just can't make myself do it. And she started asking me questions and talking. And I don't know if it was that very first session with her, but I saw her for 20 years. I'm still her friend. She'll be 90 this year. She said, you're not describing a healthy father-daughter relationship. You're describing incest. That is incestuous abuse. And, you know, I just thought, well, he never tried to rape me. He never held me down, but he seduced me and he did enough that I know it wasn't okay. You know, like your dad does not put his tongue in your mouth when he's kissing you, you know, or he doesn't put his hand up under your pajamas top and feel your breast when you're 11 years old. There were things, and I'm almost grateful for those things because I know it's not just my imagination. And so I look back at my life, and is it surprising that I'm such a strong advocate for women that no, you don't have to do what the doctor tells you, or the midwife, or the whoever. You do not have to do it. Listen to them, ask questions, make sure you've asked, well, what are the risks of that? Do your own reading, talk to people, whatever. And you make your own choices. You hold the reins. Don't let anybody take the reins out of your hands. When you allow them to do all this, you have consented without realizing you have consented if you just do what they say. And I want to support more birth workers, you know, to I guess I in the last year have been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I have had time off to get my head and heart around that. And, you know, because I had no symptoms. They found it by accident when they were scanning me for something else. And I did have breast cancer and a mastectomy 10 years ago, and they didn't even recommend chemo or radiation. I've been living my life fine. You know, I have. And I think, okay, this diagnosis that I've been given has been such a like an opportunity to there's an old expression, sharpen the saw. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is like, you know, old writing material, but he talks about, you know, take time to sharpen the saw. And that is like, if you're trying to saw something, the wood, you'll be much more effective if you've taken the time to sharpen your saw. And I'm like, okay, so I'm going to sharpen my saw. And what is it that with whatever time I have left that I want to really do effectively? And it is to help women birth in ways that help them be fully alive, fully functional, fully joyful, and so that their children benefit from that as well. You know, and when I was living in Mexico, they kept talking about whatever you do to heal yourself, you heal for the next 7 generations, and you heal for the past 7 generations. And that part, I was like, what? You know, you can heal what happened to them too. I mean, I was aware that you can make a difference for your children and your children's children, but we can heal not when we heal ourselves. It does so much good in the world but you got to do it for yourself. It's got to be, I can't be like, oh, I know I have to do this because it'll be good for my kid or whatever. And no, it's good for you. And I've learned how to say no. I say that's my new superpower. You know, I mean, before I came back to Taranaki, that was huge because I was bullied so badly here that the bullies convinced the midwifery powers that be, the midwifery advisors and the midwifery council, that I was mentally unstable and unsafe. And the bullies took me to my GP's office for an appointment they had made for me. And they told me that I could bring my husband with me for support if I wanted to. And I was like, I didn't even know what was going on. I'd been up all night with a VBAC, you know, and it ended up being a Pitocin. You know, that's really tricky with a VBAC and a vaginal birth. Anyway, they had convinced my GP, whose office was across the waiting room from my clinic room, and he was a friend. He used to bring women over and ask me questions, but they convinced him that I was mentally unstable and unsafe. And I mean, he asked me if there was anything true about this whole list he'd read through of things that had happened. And as manipulative people are often good at, is they can get a little piece of something that is true and weave it into a story that is not true. And that's what they had done. And so I had to leave Taranaki. Well, I decided, I used to say I got bullied out of Taranaki, but actually what I now say is that I it got bad enough that I decided to leave Taranaki because it wasn't safe for me here. And
Sharon,
yeah,
can you share what was it that was getting these midwives riled about who you were and how you were working? Why
I
did
can
they,
only guess, or I can only come
what
to
would be
my
your
own
guess?
conclusions about it.
Yeah.
And I was a okay, back to your question. Um, I think I I had become the most sought after midwife in this area by the end of my first year here. And they were my midwifery, two of them were my midwifery partners at the time. And women were like desperately asking me to be their midwife, saying, you know, I don't want this one. I don't want that one. I've had her before. My sister has had her. My friend has had her. So it wasn't that I wanted to be that busy or I came with the agenda to be that busy. I just was being myself, and it was what people wanted. I mean, I was being the midwife I had been called to be, I think. And I had left the United States because, at least in my training, which I was very grateful for, I was very grateful for because I learned a heck of a lot, but I did not want to practice that way. I didn't want, I was, you know, it was a very medicalized. I trained at two big city hospitals in the Bronx, and I saw so much stuff, you know, and I learned a lot. So I think and here I am, I finally landed in a place that I thought was going to be like nirvana for me, because it's New Zealand. They have the best maternity care system in the world. And I mean, but then within a few weeks, I was like, oh no, like, universe, you dropped me in here and everything aligned perfectly for me to be here with my family. We came after 2.5 years of service work in Cambodia. But this isn't what I was looking for. What? And I think I don't know if they were jealous. They saw me as a threat. Um, I was the newbie on the block, and they were trying to like help mentor me, and I had to conform to get registered in New Zealand to some degree, but I would try to talk about my ideas or my perspectives, and I would just pretty much get shut down, and I was supposed to do as I was told and do it in the ways that they'd always done it, and I didn't want to. So I was
Yeah.
trouble.
Yeah, we have this interesting situation, really, don't we, in New Zealand, where yes, women have for a long time now been able to choose their place of birth. That is, choose whether they birth at home or in the hospital or at one of the many birthing centres around the country, although a lot of them have closed in recent times. But
I was managing one that had to close. I
yeah.
was with a business partner. It was hugely traumatic.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
where women can choose their place of birth, where they can choose who their care provider is. They can, if they want, they can interview a number of midwives and go with the one they feel, you know, is most well suited to them. They can change their care provider if they don't continue to feel happy or comfortable or whatever. So they have this continuity of care with their chosen provider. They can choose where they birth, and this is all covered under the public system. So they're not having to pay for this particular sort of support. And yet, and this is why, you know, you talk about New Zealand being the, you know, the gold standard of kind of maternity care, and why you came to New Zealand from the States, where all this, you know, it was very over medicalized, and the obstetricians had final say. And so you came here because New Zealand has this amazing system, and yet the reality is that it's not so different from what's going on over in the States for a lot of women. right? And yes, here you have the opportunity as a midwife to practice in a way that is aligned with true midwifery, is aligned with supporting women to stand in their power in birth and to take ownership of their experiences and to choose their path, to decide what is best for them. And your role is to offer them the information and support and guidance they need to be able to make good informed choices for themselves. So isn't it interesting that you came over here for that reason? You start practicing that way, and yes, the women are loving it and they're wanting you, and you are being bullied by colleagues who are themselves able to practice in that same way, right? Why don't we have more midwives in New Zealand practicing true midwifery like you've been describing here?
I think that it's a multifaceted issue. I think that that a lot of the midwifery, the training is coming from this medicalized perspective. There's very little focus on what feels to me like the core of midwifery that I was called to. There is sort of a hierarchy of I've drawn it before, but I've got a pad of paper. So this is sort of the model that most of the time things work. And at the top is the obstetric. I'll show you.
Talk us through it as well, because there will be people who are listening and not watching.
Yeah, I'll show you. So okay, so can you see this?
Yep. So
Yep. Okay. So the most power is at the top.
Yeah. So I'm just going to describe to people, because some people watching the video. So she's written obstetrician in a circle at the top, then arrow down to midwife in a circle in the middle, and then arrow down to woman/baby in a circle at the bottom.
Right. So this is the most powers here, and then the next is like some power, but it's pretty much, you better get this woman to do what they're saying.
Yeah.
That's, this is how.
And when you say that, meaning the midwife, better get the woman to do what the obstetricians are saying.
Right. Yeah. And the thing is, up here at the top, there are a lot of, registrars, hospital midwives. They're kind of, and some of the hospital midwives, they're here. It's this. If you just imagine you're in a conversation or things are happening at the hospital or wherever, and you've pictured this in your head, okay, we're having this power play in our conversation. Okay, and then if you can imagine, all you have to do is in your head, imagine this.
Okay, so now I'm looking at a triangle situation. Women and baby at the top of the triangle, obstetrician and midwife at the bottom corners of the triangle, and then the arrows are pointing in both directions. So from midwife to woman and baby, arrows in both directions. From obstetrician to woman and baby, arrows in both directions. And from midwife to obstetrician, arrows in both directions.
And so this is the most power. She is
a woman and
a woman with sovereignty over her, and we are both here to support her, and we are colleagues working together with different roles and skill sets to support the woman, and we are not enemies.
Mm-hmm.
We are not. The doctors, thank God for their skills when we need them. I
Yeah.
don't ever want to feel like I'm going to enemy territory when I have to transfer in, or I'm there because the woman has chosen to birth there. They are my colleagues. I am their colleagues. And
Mm.
I want to have conversations. That's how I look at it. That, because it's, but if you're in the middle of this conversation and you're like, oh, this is, there's assumptions going on, and women put themselves down here too.
At the bottom of the
Yeah,
hierarchy.
there are some women I've realized that don't want the responsibility. They want to hand it over. They want you to tell them what to do. And that's much more comfortable for them to just hand it over. And probably they're not going to be traumatized by things that happen so much because they're okay with it.
Yeah,
I'm
I
probably
don't
not the
know.
best midwife for them.
Yeah, yes, I agree with that. Probably not the best midwife for them. I do think there will be a lot of women who hand over the responsibility because they think that is the appropriate thing to do, because they have been conditioned to believe
Yes,
that, the
yes,
midwife and obstetrician know better than they do what's best for them. So they do it from a place of believing that that
yes.
is what's going to give them the safest outcome. But I mean, I work with a lot of people who are very traumatized when they come out the other side of that,
And
because
they might
it's not what
sort
they
of think they're here, and then afterwards they're like,
yeah,
oh my gosh,
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, like some women from their culture, their experience in their life, they're conditioned to be subservient
yeah,
to
yeah,
men, to doctors, to women in a position they put them here.
yeah.
So anyway, but when I'm in a conversation that's happening, in a labor room, in a secondary clinic appointment, or even with the women when I'm doing appointments,
Mm,
I'm trying to always shift or be in this conversation
yeah, yeah.
and help the women antenatally see and feel like this is how they're expecting things to go. And even just yesterday, I was taking care of an Indian woman having her first baby, and she has complications. She has like true diabetes, not just the gestational diabetes that I have lots of doubts about. That's another conversation. But, um, and I was trying to tell her, like, as we get closer to um, her due date, that the expectation will be that they're going to recommend you be induced. And she has the experience of her sister, who's a nurse in India, being induced with her first baby with diabetes and it not going well, and the baby wasn't moving well, emergency cesarean. So she knows that it could, and she was asking, can I just request an elective cesarean? If they think I need to be induced, can I go straight to that? And I said, you can ask for anything and ask for a discussion, and think about the pros and the cons. And maybe they're saying they've already mentioned induction at 38 weeks. And I'm saying, maybe you negotiate and you say, well, I want to wait until 39 or 40 weeks. And then at 40 weeks, if I haven't gone into spontaneous labor, I want an elective cesarean. You can, like, it's not like in India, maybe, or in her, because she's also a nurse, where you're conditioned to take orders from the doctors, right? And I said, you have a voice, but you have to use it about what you think you might want or what you don't want. And I said, I just want you to know that these are what are this is recommended. The doctor may be recommending, and you can ask questions. You don't have to just take the order, and you can say, what about this? What about that? What's the risk of an induction?
mhm,
What is, because I tell women too, like, you're being induced to avoid a bad outcome because of this. Like, they've identified a risk factor and they don't want a bad outcome because of the risk factor. So they're inducing all women at, before they get to 42 weeks or whatever. And they're only doing inductions in the hospital because they're risky. They're only doing inductions with continuous fetal monitoring because your baby can become distressed. It's not, and there's risk attached that just by the very nature of how it's handled is evident, but they don't tell you that.
No, no. No.
And so yeah, that's
Yes.
it's from the very first appointment
Yeah.
with a woman. And often I go to their homes. Sometimes they come to me, but I ask them questions. If I ask them what they weigh, do you know what you weigh? And I write that down. I don't weigh them. Unless they want me to. I have a scale, but I don't necessarily. I ask them how tall they are. I write down what they told me. I ask them to check their urine, and I say, if anything turns green, bring it in for me to look at. But if it all stays yellow, just chuck it in the rubbish. I am showing them that I'm going to trust what you tell me.
Yeah.
And so what if it's a little bit wrong? Who fucking cares? Everybody knows that if they tell you that they smoke it, probably you need to double the number of what they've told you, but write down what they told you. It's establishing a relationship.
Yeah.
It's saying what you're telling me means something.
Yeah.
And you mean something.
And how different is that to what I understand to be many women's experiences, where they know the day of the first day of their last period, before they got pregnant, or they know when they conceived. So they have a and they know the length of their period, so they can work out very accurately when their baby is due. It's super easy to do.
Although there's also this thing about due dates that I tell women. I say, okay, it's an estimate. It's not an exact number. I said some women have periods every 28 days and they know when to expect it's going to happen 28 days. Other women have it every 25 or 26 days. Some women have it every 35 days. Some women never know when they're going to get pregnant. I mean, when they're going to have their period. So how can we say that everybody is due at 40 weeks? And then we have all these criteria.
So we've shifted into another conversation, but coming back to they know when their due date is, and yes, absolutely,
when their calculated EDD is.
Yeah, because when they go to their booking appointment with their midwife or the doctor or whatever, that's one of the pieces of information that's going to be gleaned, is like, right, we need to find out when you are due. And yes, we could have a big conversation about the how
all of that. That's another podcast.
But what I was going to say, how many women know when they're due, and yet they go to their midwife or doctor appointment and they get given a scan form to go and get a dating scan done. Like,
that was my training in the States. Here it comes. And look at what's happening in the States now. Watch out.
Yeah, how patronizing is that? Like, we're not going to trust that your body better than a freaking scan machine does, and your information doesn't count. Your own knowledge doesn't count.
So many women want to go for scan. They want to see their baby.
I know, right. Again, another conversation that we could dive deeply into is,
And I usually am trying. I want the due date to be as far away as possible because I've had situations, for example, where a woman is in early labor, and if she's less than 24 weeks, the care that's provided or not provided is very different than after 24 weeks.
Yeah, right.
So those due dates end up having a significant impact down the road, potentially.
Yeah. You said earlier that you were talking about, obstetricians will make recommendations, and we need any listeners to
Based on
understand
the guidelines, protocols, they're not laws, but
they
they
are not laws. They are not laws. Thank you. They are recommendations based on these guidelines, many of which are not based on good evidence, I've got to say. And
Well,
so,
Hensey Goer is perfect for that. She says it's based on obstetric myth versus research reality.
yeah, beautiful. Yes. So they are recommendations. They are not laws. And although they may be put to you like it's an expectation, like that this is what we are going to do, that this is how we are going to proceed, please know that regardless of how this is being put to you, that it is your absolute right to say, no, I do not agree to having that done, or I need more information before I make a decision about that, or I want time to decide on my next best steps. That so, like I just find it so infuriating, actually, that they have all these posters up around the hospital walls and the doctors' clinics saying your code of consumer rights, one of which is, your right to informed choice and consent. And yet that is just trampled all over, left, right, and centre, right in front of that poster in those clinic rooms or in that hospital
I
setting.
love the HDC Code of Rights.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's exactly what I was pointing out to that obstetrician at
Yep.
that appointment when she was saying, you'll have to do that. She knew I was right. I just trumped her. I
Yeah.
just trumped her. But you can do it. I love doing it in such a
Peaceful,
calm
calm.
and confident way.
Yes. Yeah. I love it. I love that, Sharon. That was just such a brilliant share. And can you tell me, like, I'm just thinking back to that diagram you drew with the triangle and the woman slash baby at the top and the obstetrician in one bottom corner and the midwife other bottom corner. And you said, the obstetrician, they have their, or the medical
Is
professionals,
she?
a role and pregnancy, birth support, and the midwife has a role. And their roles are different, right? And I just want to say that this isn't for everybody, right? Like, some people will choose not to have any midwifery care or any obstetric care, and that's their choice. But for those who do, what are those differing roles? What is the role in your mind, Sharon, of a midwife?
In my mind, my definition, or, for me, I always am telling young birth workers, midwives, whatever, like, don't let them clamp and cut the cord to your midwifery soul.
Yeah.
Don't let them do that. I think we are all trying to provide the best outcome possible from the perspective we have about what that is. And I think all of those guidelines and protocols and recommendations, even whatever, they're coming at it from what I understand more to be a public health perspective. Like, there's this big fishing net, and they're trying to catch all the risk factors that you have. And their job is to have the biggest, best net that has the smallest holes so that nothing slips through. And it's kind of a defensive medicine perspective where if a woman is over a certain age and there's an increased chance of women over a certain age having a stillborn baby, it's still a tiny risk, right? But they know how to manipulate the numbers too, like to scare you. It might be that the risk from something is 2 out of 1,000 and it increases to 4 out of 1,000, and they tell you the risk doubles.
which is true.
of a dead baby, right? Of a stillborn baby. Of course, nobody wants their baby to be stillborn. So they agree to the thing, the induction or the intervention. And so because what has happened over time is if a baby or a mother has a bad outcome and they had any of these risk factors and the intervention wasn't done, they're going to be hung for not doing it. And that's the perspective that the doctors are coming from. And the so they're looking at it from, like, we deal with hundreds, thousands of women. And an example, I was working as a hospital midwife mentoring students at Middlemore Hospital for a while, and a registrar came in just as a baby was about to be born, and I'd been with this woman all day, and she told me to cut an episiotomy. And I've got a new student watching. She was just observing. Anyway, so I'm in that role of working with students. And I looked at the obstetrician and I said, registrar, yeah, much younger than me, much more inexperienced than me. And I said, can you give me the rationale for that episiotomy? And she said, because she's Indian. And I said, because she's Indian, you want her to have an episiotomy? And she said, yes. And I said, well, I've taken care of many Indian women who've birthed without episiotomies and done just fine. And she said, oh, well, they have more third and fourth degree tears than other women. And we're the ones who have to repair those, aren't we? You don't have to repair those. So cut an episiotomy.
Wow.
And I looked at her and I was like, and she said, if you don't do it, I will. And I'm in a role, I'm the cog in the wheel in that. I felt like it in that role of being a hospital. I was employed by the school, but working in the hospital. Anyway, I looked at her. I've got a student over my left shoulder, her husband's sitting, over there, and they'd had a very traumatic first birth. And I had helped, the first thing they do, they come in and flip the lights to full blast, so that, and cut an episiotomy. So I just looked at the obstetrician and I said, because I didn't want to have to step aside and let her cut it. And in the hospital, it is this, or you get fired. So I said, I will cut an episiotomy under your instruction. And I numbed it, and I cut a small episiotomy. And she said, no, no, bigger, bigger to here. And she points way down on the perineum. And I said to her, I just want to see what happens with the next contraction. Like, I'm exaggerating but you got to think on your feet. And the baby was born. I put the baby on, and the obstetrician registrar says, do you want me to repair that for you? And I said, no, I'm perfectly capable of doing the repair myself. Thank you. And then they all go out of the room and the lights get dimmed and, it's sutured and, we're back to peace, back to peace. And the husband says from the corner, Sharon, I know that you didn't want to cut my wife, and I know why you had to. And I really want to thank you for the care you've given her and us today. Thank you so much. Now, that's somebody I met within an 8-hour period, working a shift, And there were other things that were happening. And I just thought, afterwards, I went out with the student, and out of the room, I said, are they teaching you in midwifery school to cut episiotomies on women because they're Indian? That was her risk factor. She was Indian. And the student said, no. And I said, I didn't think so. I'm going to have to address what just happened. And I went to my boss and her boss and asked for a meeting. And in that meeting, there had been like issues, right, that I'd already discussed some of the issues, but that was my prime example of an issue that was not I was struggling with. And in the meeting, before the meeting, I was talking with my husband and my son about I may have to resign. I was only doing 2 shifts a week, and it was right after my mastectomy. It was the first kind of work I was doing after breast cancer. And I said, I may have to let this one go, like we'll see how this meeting goes. And my son said to me, Mom, you're a chef, not a fast food midwife. And I was like, yeah, I'm a chef, not a fast food midwife. So I go to the meeting and we're talking, and and I told that story about the birth, and my boss's boss, they also worked shifts in that setting. She just said, this might not reflect well on me and her subordinate manager that was there. It might not reflect well on us, but we probably would have just cut that episiotomy and not thought twice about it. And this is why it never works for us to hire home birth oriented midwives, because they just don't fit in here. And I knew that. That's why I went there, because I thought I had delusions of grandeur that I could change things or whatever. And I said, well, I think I need to resign. I think I'm going to need to resign. And they said, well, we've been kind of thinking maybe that is what needs to happen if you're okay with that. And I said, yeah, I'm okay with that. And they, like, from under the table, pulled out all the paperwork for me to sign to resign.
Wow.
And I said, yeah, I understand. And they said, so that means that you won't be going back for any more shifts. And I said, yeah, I understand that. And they said, even the shifts that you're already rostered on for, you don't go in for those. And I said, I understand. I've got it. Yep, I'm happy to sign this. And I went out of there, and I'd actually made them both window like light catchers. I was making these stained glass things, and the night before I made each of them one that I really thought was beautiful, and I was thinking about them as I made it. And before the meeting started, I said, this is my new hobby, and I made one for each of you, and it was wrapped up in a box. And they opened it, and they were holding it up, looking at it and thinking, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful, Sharon, thank you so much. And I was thinking, yeah, I'm giving it to you as a gift from my heart. And I hope you hang it in a window, that you see it every day and you think about this conversation that we're about to have, that it sits down in your soul.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And then within a couple of months, maybe, there was a midwifery conference, the NZCOM conference. And the midwife who'd said she would probably cut the episiotomy and not think twice about it, she was at the podium to be the MC for the day, right? And we're just waiting for people to come in and be seated in the auditorium. And she saw me out in a seat in the auditorium, and she said, oh, Sharon, hello, from the podium on the speaker. And then she comes down the stage, up the aisle, and in the row to give me a hug. And I thought, you know, but you've lost connection with your conscience.
Yeah, because look, if we reflect on this situation that happened in the hospital that you described, like you did the best you could under the circumstances, but in reality, that flies in the face of the law, which says that it's a woman's right to choose. Where was the woman being asked, do you consent to an episiotomy? Like, this is, you're a threat to the system as it is. And a lot of people say, the system is broken, the maternity system is broken. And I say, well, no, it's not broken. It's functioning as it's designed to do. And that's to keep the power with those, authority figures, to keep the the power and the money flowing to people who don't really give a shit about the poor outcomes for
They
women.
do though,
In
Carla. I
terms,
think they do.
but in
I
terms of their mental health is what I was going to say. In terms of like, how do they feel about their birth experience? In terms of, like,
maybe I choose to believe, but I choose to believe that the people working in the system, they want a good outcome.
mm,
They actually do. They just don't get it.
right,
They don't realize, I mean, maybe so that I can not consider them to be the enemy, you know. One more little story, and I know we've probably used up way too much time, but I had a woman.
Sharon, before you dive into it, I just want to say in regards to this, I agree. And I don't think obstetricians, midwives, um, by and large, are knowingly causing trauma. They are not wanting women to experience birth as traumatic, and they are doing these things that I and you maybe know are causing trauma for women, not with that intention in mind at all, but quite the opposite, because they've come from a different training background, because they have a different perspective on it all, owing to their upbringing perhaps, or their
They've
their
been
training.
trained in their medical,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
in ways to manipulate and
yeah,
coerce and make it look, or make the patient, I mean, I don't even use the word patient,
yeah,
because that comes from this model.
yeah, that
I mean,
hierarchical.
I use the
That,
woman, but
yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
yeah, they've, in order to be a good doctor,
mm,
that's how you do it.
yeah,
I mean, that's the measure of success, is that you've gotten the woman to, you know, you've carried out the protocols, the guidelines, you know,
yeah.
I've got so many stories about
Yes,
situations where I've been in the room and I've heard the obstetrician, you know, hounding a woman about needing to proceed with this one story of an induction that she'd wanted a home birth. It was an IVF baby and she was 40 or 41. And we finally showed up at the hospital at 42 weeks and 6 days. She finally felt, okay, I agree. I'll be induced, but I don't want it done that way. I want it done this way. And, you know, she wanted to wait after such and such had been done an extra 8 or 10 hours. And it was to the point where she even said, when is the doctor that's on this shift off of their shift? And I'll agree to the next step of the induction when she's off. And I found out there's a change of shift, because the woman didn't like that
yeah,
doctor.
yeah.
And so I'm supporting her through as best I can
Mm-hmm.
this induction that she didn't really want, but she crumbled and felt like women get to the point that if anything does happen, they'll never forgive themselves.
Mm,
I've had that happen with a woman who was almost 44 weeks. But anyway, so I listened to the obstetrician just hammering the woman with, you know, your baby could die and blah, 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 and we need to do this and blah, blah. And she said, I know, I've got it. The woman could speak for herself, so I didn't have to say anything in the room. But after, and she said, I will agree to having whatever, my water's broken at 10 o'clock tonight if I haven't established in labor by then or whatever. So when the obstetrician left the room, I said to the woman, now I'm kind of I am working with you and I'm working with them. They're the ones doing the orders for this induction. And so I'm just thinking, is it okay with you if I go out to the office and just see if there's anything else that the obstetrician wants to say with me, and then I'll be back in a few minutes. Is that okay with you? And she said, yeah. So I go out and I sit down next to this obstetrician and she's seething. because she couldn't get the woman to do what she needed to before the end of her shift. And she's got a handover, and she was not successful at getting this woman to do what she was supposed to do so that the obstetrician looks like she's done her job well.
Yeah, right.
And she's writing and writing and writing, like instead of her 2 or 3 sentences, it's like 2 or 3 pages. And I'm just sitting quietly next to her, waiting. And then she finished writing and she looks at me and she says, "You know, I had to do that, right? You know, I had to do that. That's what they hire me for. That's my job." And I was just sitting there listening. And she said, "If I didn't do that, Sharon, I wouldn't be doing my job." And I was like, okay. Well, I mean, I'm thinking to myself. And she said, "And Sharon, I am so glad you are here for her."
Yeah. Yeah.
So she got it. She understood, but she had to do it anyway. That's what she thought. And I was like, oh my gosh, you are a cog in the wheel that's got to keep turning and follow these rules that you've got written down. And the difference is that what I want to do is treat each person as an individual. You know, that this, okay, there are these guidelines. If you've got this risk factor, we have this plan in place to avoid the bad outcome that this risk factor is making more of a possibility than if you don't have the risk factor. So yes, we need to understand that. Yes, we need to think about that. We also need to think about this woman. What are her circumstances? What is her history? What is important to her? What does she have going for her that is like wonderfully strong, healthy? You know, this is only a small part, but it's like the system. I imagine a bulldog that is looking for a rat, and the risk factor is the rat, and they're like smelling around. I've got to find the rats. And then they get the rat in the corner, and they're just like at the rat and barking and carrying on, and they forget everything else in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're doing their job. But I think, okay, we need to understand the research. We need to know what we're doing. We need to know what could be offered, but we need to make sure we consider her and what is going to help her have the best outcome possible for her, her baby, her family, her community, humanity.
Yeah. Why aren't more midwives working like this?
They don't have anybody mentoring them. They
Yeah.
don't believe it's possible. It's too scary. It feels like pie in the sky. It's not doable. It's not realistic. They're crumbling.
Yeah.
I mean, the obstetricians have already crumbled. I mean, they put them, but I suspect that they became obstetricians because they were interested in helping mothers and babies. And there are times when, you know, they can do things to have a better outcome than if they weren't there to do those things. That's what I believe.
Oh, 100%.
They are
100%.
not my enemy,
No.
and I'm not theirs.
Mm. Mm.
So maybe I want to finish with the quote that I read this and I knew it's from Suzanne Arms, that I knew I wanted to be a midwife. Like, yeah, that's the reason. And I have this little book that I give out to all the women I take care of, and it's in here. And this, well, there's 2 things, but I'll just do this. Okay, so Suzanne Arms, and it's at the bottom of this page, and it's lots of pictures. Just to every point of contact that I have with a woman, I want at the end of that phone call, appointment, everything, that she feels calmer and more confident. calm and confident. It goes through my head, calm and confident. And this is, if we are to create a nonviolent world where respect and kindness replace fear and hatred, we must begin with how we treat each other at the beginning of life. For that is where our deepest patterns are set. From these roots grow fear and alienation, or love and trust. Suzanne Arms. And I'm in a group with her. She's over 80. We meet once a month about let's have children grow up without a childhood they have to recover from.
Absolutely.
And birth is a powerful journey, whatever way you get through it, it's going to have a profound impact on your life and that spreads, it has a ripple effect for your child. I mean, my friend Brendan Pitwood, he's always talking about the baby. We need to think about the baby. What is the impact for this baby? And I really do believe that we are imprinted before we have language so they say babies don't remember. Well, they just didn't have the language so that they can remember with words to tell you, or even like consciously remember. It's a subconscious memory from conception.
Yeah.
Of their experience. And, that's why one of the reasons I couldn't work at the hospital in the Bronx as a midwife there, you had to do the advanced training and do the circumcisions on the little boys before they were discharged. That's the environment I came from. I was trained there. And I just knew I'm out of here. I'm out of here. I mean, they did a lot of good, but I learned a lot about what I didn't want to do. And so I left the country. I've never worked as a midwife in the United States.
Sharon, can I ask you one last question? That for anybody who's listening who is either a student midwife or who is looking to become a midwife potentially, what advice would you give?
I think we should all be having supervision. I mean, it can be supervision is, I didn't understand that word, but it's somewhat like a lot of professions that are quite difficult. You have someone you talk to regularly that's not even a midwife necessarily, but you can debrief, and because you end up having trauma, you witness it, you contribute to it. You start to feel like I'm one of the ones who, anyway, so you need really good support. It doesn't necessarily have to be supervision in a professional way, but you need to hang around. I heard this years ago, like if there's somebody you really admire, hang around them as much as you can without being annoying. Like you need their support. You need to know that there is a tribe of people that you admire and that are doing the work in the way that you believe that you were called to this profession, and don't let it get beaten out of you. When things happen that you feel like you just can't do it in the way you dreamed you were going to be able to do it. You need support. You need to be able to talk that through with somebody, because I think that is the biggest problem with burnout in this. I mean, they say midwives in New Zealand last an average of 6-point-something years, not even 7 years. That's the average life expectancy of a midwife in New Zealand. And they talk about it's because we don't get paid enough. For me, the pay is not a problem. I can live on the pay. I mean, yeah, let's get paid an equal amount. But my problem is that you're killing me. This system is killing me. I'm being midwife eat their young. I heard that and I was like horrified, but it's true. Unfortunately, it's true that you are not rewarded for being a good midwife. You get treated like you're crazy
So
and unsafe.
find other midwives who work in an aligned way, in a way that feels fitting for you in terms of how you want to work as a midwife, and support one another in your practice. So find a
And
group.
I don't want to discourage anyone from becoming a midwife. I
No,
want to encourage them. We need good
yeah,
midwives.
yeah, we do. We do. I know that for me, when I was a student midwife, I asked to be put with as many home birth midwives as I could be, or home birthing families as I could be, for all of my sort of practical sort of, I don't know, practicums and that sort of thing. And that made an absolute world of difference. It I had it modeled to me firsthand by the likes of the wonderful, Jenny Johnson, who I've done a podcast interview with, an incredible home birth midwife.
Godsend of a woman.
Yeah, absolutely, and others like, I really did witness some incredible midwifery when I was a student, and that helped. But then also, when I was a midwife in Hamilton, I was part of the home birth collective, that was run by, or held, a collective of home birth midwives in the area, and we would meet at one of our homes. I can't remember how often, but that was to debrief experiences we'd had, to discuss things that had cropped up, unusual cases or whatever, and how they were managed, how we could do better next time. Like, that was a safe space to talk about, how you're practicing, and to get feedback from midwives you trusted, and to feel supported in your grief when something hadn't, gone as you would have liked, or whatever. But having that collegial support from like-minded midwives was huge.
Yeah, and I think we have to have ways to process all of the difficulties so that we don't just like carry more and more and more of it, because then when difficult things happen, we don't respond in healthy ways.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
if it's just
that's right.
accumulating and accumulating, it's like you just finally burst
Yeah,
and you're full of shit.
yeah,
When you've just held on to it and held on to it and held on to it.
absolutely.
And so, yeah,
Yeah,
we need you. So I don't want to discourage you. I just want you to be as well prepared as possible. And I want you to last a lot longer than 6 or 7 years.
yeah, yeah. Sharon, you and I are part of this, like, Wise Women Network NZ page that we've started on Facebook, and this is what we're all about, right? It's like gathering uh, support, garnering support for midwives and the women they serve,
And
who
there are other
was
people
stuck.
that are trying to do this. Like,
Yeah,
thank goodness for all the women or doulas, or, like, I think a lot of the support that we need is not going to be found in the mainstream part of our system, our midwifery, whatever that. Yeah, it's like we need a bigger, wider, okay, how is this impacting women? How are their births going? Are they, yeah, okay, at the end of the day, it's like the obstetrician may walk out after that cesarean or that ventouse delivery, and or thinking, washing their hands and about to leave the room, and a good outcome. There's a live baby that didn't end up having to go to the neonatal unit because of brain damage, suspected brain damage or something. And the mom, yeah, she had a big episiotomy. Yeah, she had a postpartum hemorrhage. Yeah, she had this, but she's alive. We've taken good care of her. And they walk out and they think they've done a good job. But like, what are things looking like for her and her baby and her family in the next week or the next month? Or you know, when she's 80 years old, she still remembers what she went through. And I'm looking at it long term, and I'm looking at it, I am trying to do my best for each individual woman as an individual, not assembly line. I'm not a fast food midwife.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Sharon, this has been such an awesome and greatly needed discussion, and I love your sharing of stories as examples of what true midwifery looks like and what women deserve when they are being supported through their pregnancies and their birth.
Yeah, I had one woman, yeah, she just years later after a cesarean, um she said thank you for, and there wasn't a lot of her input, but she said, Sharon, thank you for keeping me and my baby safe.
Yeah.
You know, like, just really try to keep doing your best, and that will sustain you. That is what sustains me, not the money. I mean, that does sustain something, but you know, I want to lay down when it's time for the end of my life and look back and think I did my best. And it's not perfect either, you know, not everybody's been happy with everything I've done, but I did my best.
Thank you.
Thank you.